5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, magandang gabi po sa lahat. Ito po ang Usapang Batas Episode 12 with Attorney Jean Bagsic, at napakapalad po natin ngayong gabi at kasama natin isa sa mga eksperto tungkol sa larangan ng politika. Hindi dahil sa politiko siya, kundi dahil pinag-aralan niya ang politika sa New Zealand at ngayon ay nagtatrabaho siya sa gobyerno dito sa New Zealand. So ang topic natin for tonight is political system ng New Zealand. Gaya po na nasabi natin sa post kanina na hindi ito tungkol sa mga partido o mga kandidato dito sa New Zealand, pero ang layunin po ng episode na ito ay para maintindihan ng mga Pilipino, lalong-lalo na yung mga citizen at mga residente na, kung ano yung sistema ng politika dito sa New Zealand. Para alam din natin, kapag tayo boboto, alam din natin kung sino yung mga binoboto natin at para saan ba yung binoboto natin. Okay? So, ang ating pong panahon ngayon is currently working sa Climate Commission dito sa New Zealand na based in Wellington. Pero before po noon, siya ay nakakapagtrabaho doon sa bilang researcher sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno, naging advisor at analyst din ng iba't ibang sangay ng gobyerno, at actually habang siya nag-aaral, siya po ay naging isa sa mga presidente ng Otago University Students Association nung siya ay nag-aaral pa. So, without further ado, maluwag ko pong pinapakilala si Francisco Hernandez. Okay. Hi Francisco.
Hello, thank you.
Okay. So I think, should I call you Kiko? Okay lang ba yun, Kiko?
Call me Kiko.
Okay. So Kiko, I think kasi bilang migrant din, di ba? I mean, although dumating ka sa New Zealand where you were still a teenager, pero when you were growing up sa Philippines, I think you were also exposed in a way sa political system sa Pilipinas na may presidente, may kongreso, may senado. So, syempre ibang-iba when you arrive in New Zealand. So, syempre unang-unang tanong na lahat is laging narinig yung parliament, di ba? Yung salitang parliament. Ano ba yung parliament, Kiko?
Parliament yung supreme, yung legislature na New Zealand. Similar sa Congress sa Pilipinas, pero walang Senate sa New Zealand. Isang legislative body lang. So when Parliament passes a law, that law then goes through all the stages of Parliament and then gets signed by the Governor General, and then it becomes law. Whereas in the Philippines, to become a law, it needs to go through first Congress and then Senate and then signed into law by the President. So Parliament is similar to the legislative body in the Philippines, like the Congress. Except it's different because it has more powers because it's the sole legislative body in New Zealand.
Okay. Kasi, di ba Kiko, sa Philippines kasi, sa mga hindi pala nakakalam kasi ang prilo ko ba sa Pilipinas ay political science. So medyo, yung political system is also something that I know and I think I'm passionate about din. Sa Philippines kasi, di ba, may executive branch, merong legislative branch, tapos may judiciary. Is that also applicable dito sa New Zealand, yung ganung 3 branches? Kiko?
Kind of applicable, pero yung judiciary na New Zealand hindi as strong. Sa New Zealand, may Westminster system. So the picture of the Westminster system is that the legislature is supreme. So it can pass a law that overrules the judiciary if it wants to. So it also has an executive in that when we vote for members of parliament, and in the members of parliament then depending on the parties form a government, and then that government then has ministers which form, and the core part of those ministers become the cabinet, and then the cabinet are sort of the executive, they're the decision-making body of New Zealand, similar to how we have a cabinet in the Philippines. Um, we have a cabinet in New Zealand as well.
Okay, kasi sa Pilipinas, Kiko, yung cabinet is chosen by the president, di ba? Pag nag-elect tayo ng president sa Pilipinas, siya yung namimili ng mga secretary, yung mga department of secretary ng ganyan, ng mga and other even mga agencies, mga agency heads ng Philippines. Sa New Zealand, magkaiba ata, no? Hindi ganon, walang presidente na nag-appoint. It's mostly sila rin yung MP, kumbaga.
Yung mga minister appointed by the prime minister, and that's based on the negotiations within the different parties and within the party of the that the prime minister's from as well. So the prime minister appoints the cabinet members, but that's also negotiated between them, unlike in the Philippines where it's the president that appoints the cabinet members.
Okay. What can you say about yung mga political parties dito, Kiko? Kasi sa Philippines, madalas nga kung minsan kung sino yung presidente, gagawa sa ng sariling partido, di ba? And meron din mga matatandang partido na, pero sa mga panahon ngayon, yung mga well, I don't know if it's true, pero it's not more on base of ideology na kumbaga sa Pilipinas Pero ito sa New Zealand, parang kumbaga ideology and mga principles is talagang very kumbaga enshrined in every party. So what can you say about political parties dito sa New Zealand, Kiko?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct in that in the Philippines the political parties there are what you'd call more, and sorry if this is inaccessible, but it's a political science term, are more personalist. So they're based on the personalities of the presidents that sort of form the parties, and they coalesce around them and sort of advocate for their policies. Whereas in New Zealand, you're right, they're more ideology based. So there's 5 parties currently in New Zealand's parliament. There's the National Party, which is a sort of center right to right wing party. They're sort of liberal conservatives, so they believe in supporting business. They believe in generally lower taxes. And then there's the party leader currently is Todd Muller. And then there's the Labour Party, which is the party of Jacinda Ardern currently. And the Labour Party, like its name, believes more in supporting workers. So they stand for unions and workers. They stand for more state spending rather than tax cuts. And then there's the New Zealand First Party. And the New Zealand First Party is like the nationalist party. So they stand for, lower immigration, putting New Zealanders first, that kind of thing. And they're led by Winston Peters, who I'm sure we've all heard of. And the fourth is the Green Party. And the Green Party, like its name, stands for, green causes, the environment, protecting nature, that kind of thing. And then the fifth one is the ACT Party. And they're more of a libertarian party who stand for, freedoms and less state government and less taxation. So those are the sort of 5 parties that are currently in New Zealand Parliament. There's others outside of Parliament as well, like the Maori Party, and they stand for upholding the Treaty of Waitangi, and partnership between Maori and Pākehā, and a bunch of others outside of Parliament as well, like the Opportunities Party.
Okay. Kiko, for the benefit of our viewers, kasi madalas nadidinig sa even on the news or in the papers, di ba meron yung may right, may center, at yung left. So, paano ba natin in the simplest description, paano mo ba describe yung left? Paano mo ba describe yung center? Paano mo ba describe yung right, left, and center?
Yeah, yung mga right-wing politics, typically they believe in less interference by government, and they believe in more freedom by individuals to do what they want to do. So typically they would have low taxation, but the trade-off of that is less public spending,
Mm.
whereas the left of politics tends to support more collective approach in things. So they
Mm.
tend to favor higher taxes but better public services. Whereas, and obviously, this is a very simplistic explanation of a really
Mm.
complex topics.
Oo. So,
But yeah, and the center sort of tries to strike a balance between the left and right. None of the major parties in New Zealand, Labour and National, you would tend to describe as like extreme right or extreme left.
mhm.
Labour tend to be center left, and so National also tend to be center right.
Mm. Okay. Now, in terms of si Queen Elizabeth, I mean the Queen of si Queen, meron pa ba siyang role sa New Zealand politics or government?
Yeah, like the Queen Elizabeth has a ceremonial role, but it's a role that she delegates to the Governor General in New Zealand.
Mhm.
Because as you can imagine, the Queen is busy all the way over in England, so she
Mhm.
doesn't have time to, preside over the opening of state ceremonies and stuff. But New Zealand has a legal constitutional relationship with um, Queen Elizabeth because she's technically our monarch.
Mhm. So apart from granting knighthoods and yung mga is there any other way na nag-interfere pa ang Queen sa New Zealand politics?
No, not really.
Not
She's
really.
more like ceremonial hands-off.
Ceremonial na lang talaga, no?
Legally speaking, the Queen and the Governor General has what's called reserve powers,
Mhm.
which they can use to theoretically dismiss elected governments. But when that happened in Australia, it caused quite a constitutional crisis. So it's never happened in New Zealand yet.
Okay. Now, speaking of constitution, Kiko, kasi sa Philippines meron tayong constitution eh. I mean, marami ng versions and merong, I think the first one was 1935, naging 1971, and then nagkaroon ng 1987, which is the latest constitution in the Philippines. Sa New Zealand ba, meron ba tayong constitution in New Zealand?
The answer is quite complicated. So it's yes
Hmm.
and no. We don't have like a
Mm.
formal codified document called
Yeah.
like a constitution,
Mhm.
but the New Zealand does derive constitutional authority from like several sources of power, including like a Constitution Act, convention, the cabinet manual, that kind of thing. So even though we don't have like a formal written constitution,
Mhm.
we do have like an informal constitution that's derived from several documents, and also, things like the Treaty of Waitangi,
Mhm.
things like the Bill of Rights Act. So, and the common law as well.
Okay.
So
Speaking of
complicated.
common law, how can you describe common law? Kasi that's something new and foreign sa mga, especially with American types of
Yeah,
government, di ba? So, can you explain us what common law is,
yeah.
Kiko?
Well, you'll correct me on this, I'm sure, Gene, because you're the actual lawyer between the two of us. But civil law is a sort of law which is based on code. It's like heavily codified, whereas civil law is based more on practice and tradition
Mhm.
that's been handed down. So common law really takes a lot of precedence from cases that have happened rather than having like a codified set of principles and descriptions like civil law has. But is that a correct summary?
Yeah, I mean, you passed the test. That's good. Yeah, kasi especially of course Philippines kasi we're a former American colony. So most of the laws in the Philippines are based on American laws. Well, some are Spanish, but mostly American laws and tradition. That's why yun nga tama ka na codified and based on civil law. And unlike sa New Zealand, which is of course a former British colony, so talagang reliant on common law. Okay?
That's
Uh,
right, and that's part of the reason why the Philippines has the form of governance it has now with the president, the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the Senate. It's very similar to the American one because we inherited that political system from the Americans, and
mm,
New Zealand, being a colony of the British, inherited our legal and political traditions from the British who used to run the country as a colony.
Okay. So, like kung nababasa to, Kiko, I mean, might as well put the question to you. Di ba yung Queen is the head of state, pero the Prime Minister is the head of government, di ba?
That's
Tama
right.
ba yun?
Yes,
So,
that's correct.
so how can you put it in, paano natin elaborate more on yung being a head of state as compared to a head of government?
So the head of state um, is someone who's the well, what you would because we have like a monarchy system, the permanent head of the country that doesn't change with the government, whereas the government changes depending on who gets elected into power. So, for example, 20 years ago, Queen Elizabeth was still the head of state for New Zealand, but the prime minister then was, I think, 2000 was Helen Clark. So the head of government changes depending on the legislature, whereas the head of state is like a more permanent figure, which represents the state, at least in Westminster democracies like New Zealand. It's different in the Philippines, as you know, where the head of state is elected.
Now, going to elections, kasi di ba, the right to vote is one of the most basic rights dito. I mean, in any civilized country. So, how do you vote in New Zealand, and who do you vote in New Zealand ba? If you have the right to vote?
Yeah, so the people that have the right to vote in New Zealand are permanent residents and citizens. So if you're a permanent resident or a citizen, you're definitely allowed to vote. And I encourage you to register to get to vote so you can have your say. So the votes you have, you can vote for your local government, but you also vote for, particularly this year, for the parliamentary elections. And you have two votes. You have your first vote is the electorate vote, and that vote determines on who becomes the local MP for your area. So, for example, if you're living in Rotorua, it's only one seat, and you vote for who represents your area in Parliament. But your second vote, which is the party vote, is the most important vote at all. Is like a really important vote as well, because it determines which parties get to govern New Zealand, because the party vote determines the share of seats that parties are allocated in Parliament.
So ilang seats ba ang kailangan ang parliament ngayon?
Well, it's 120 seats in Parliament.
120, okay.
And 70 are electorate seats and 50 are list seats.
Okay. Now, so when you vote in terms of parliamentary na system, so you vote for the party, and then your second vote is your distrito. Tawag sa Pilipinas distrito.
Yeah,
diba?
that's
so,
right. It's similar to the vote for the congressman in the districts in the Philippines.
And then, so once na-casting yung vote, so how do you determine who is the winner? How is a prime minister determined? Kasi, especially with the last election, di ba parang National got the highest vote in terms of party, pero now we have a labor coalition-led government. So how did that happen, Kiko?
Yeah. So based on the party votes, the parties get allocated a share of the seats. So even though National had, I think, 43% of the seats in Parliament, because Labour, Greens, and New Zealand first combined had something like 53% or 54, that means they got to form government because they have more seats. So it's the coalition, it's the party which is able to assemble a coalition that carries confidence in the House, so that can pass law and make laws in Parliament that determine who gets to form the government, rather than it's not necessarily the largest party that gets to form government in New Zealand. It's the party that commands the majority of the House vote.
Okay. Now in terms of yung mga MPs natin, Kiko, 'di ba meron yung mga district MPs or local MPs, I don't know
Yeah,
how they
electorate
call
MPs.
elected MPs, and then you have the list MPs.
That's
So
right. Yes.
so paano mo madi-differentiate yon, Kiko?
Uh, the electorate MP is the local MP for your area,
Mhm.
whereas the list MP is, and the electorate MP is directly elected by the members of the public. So you vote for them, or you don't vote for them. But whereas the list MPs are elected by the political party that they're part of. So different parties have different internal processes that determine who become list MPs, because parties put forward what's called a party list ahead of the election,
Mhm.
and then based on the party rank, based on the individual's ranking on the party list, determines whether they're able to get into parliament or not.
Okay. So for example ngayon, Kiko, of course based na lang natin sa most recent polls, no?
Yeah,
So halimbawa, I think now is Labor is leading the party vote, tama ba?
that's right.
So
Labor's leading the
how would that equate? And for example, take na example yung latest polls. So how would that equate to a government probably after September, after election? So how does the government look like after election with the polling system at yung poll votes ngayon?
Yeah, well, on current numbers, I think Labor is polling at around 54 to 56%,
Mhm.
depending on the poll you look like. So they're in a position to get 56% of the seats in the New Zealand Parliament, which is around 67 seats. And because New Zealand has 120 seats, they can form a majority government on that basis.
So on their own. So di na nila kailangan yung New Zealand First or
Yeah,
yung Greens
on
if
current
ever.
polling numbers, they wouldn't need the Greens or New Zealand First, but that number tends to go down during the election, and a lot can happen between now and September.
Okay. Also, one of the polls na pinapalabas sa news, apart from the party, is yung preferred prime minister, di ba? I mean, it's also one of the lumalabas sa polling on. So how would that affect the election, if ever? Or the
Uh,
kind of government in terms of the preferred prime minister?
yeah, that it doesn't legally have an impact on
Mm.
the who forms government. You still have to vote for the party you want. So um, theoretically, it doesn't really make a difference because it's only like a measure of approval. But in reality, people do base their voting decisions on who looks the most popular. So it it does tend to affect people's votes on who people most want to become prime minister. They tend to vote for the party of that person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, of course, it's election campaign period na ata. I mean, based on the calendar and the schedule. So election campaign, how would you differentiate? Of course, totally different from the Philippines. I don't need to elaborate on how campaigns are run in the Philippines, but how does a campaign run in New Zealand? Kasi obvious, di na wala mong sumasayaw at kumakanta dyan
Yeah,
na kandidato, di ba?
walang kandidato, walang
Yeah, so,
um so in New Zealand they tend to campaign by going door to door. They
mhm,
also have some rallies as well, and you'll probably start seeing ads on your TV.
mhm,
Billboards is like a billboards is a really big deal in New Zealand as well. You'll see them like on the side of the road. So
mhm,
yeah, the sort of campaign is really, it's quite different in New Zealand because I don't think it's as colorful as Filipino elections. I
mhm,
certainly remember the
mhm,
sort of convoys going in and out of the cities in the Philippines.
mhm.
It's not that dynamic here. And
And even donations sa mga candidates and parties, I think it's really also strict, Kiko. I mean, in the Philippines, meron tayong mga laws on donations and on restricting on being transparent. Pero of course, it's not being implemented very well. Pero sa New Zealand ba, I mean, how are donations sort of parang ini-inspect or na-monitor ng gobyerno in a way, donations? Of course, you cannot run a campaign without money, di ba? I mean, I think that's a given. You need money to campaign. Pero how are donations uh, run or monitored in New Zealand to a particular candidate or to a party?
It's both. So there's a threshold where donations to a candidate or a party have to be declared. I can't remember what the threshold is, but I think it's something like 3,000 or 1,000. I can't quite remember. But the body that looks after elections in New Zealand is called the Electoral Commission,
Mm-hmm.
and they monitor donations over a particular amount and make sure that people aren't donating more than to influence policies for kickbacks or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely monitored in New Zealand.
Okay. And even on election day, I mean, let's go to election day.
Yeah.
I remember, I mean, of course, you would have voted as well. Di ba parang dito, is it, you go to the school nearest you, tama ba? And it's for the whole week. Unlike sa Philippines, isang araw lang ang eleksyon, May
Yeah.
11. So, I mean, I think the second Monday of May ang election. Sa dito ba sa New Zealand? I mean, how are elections called and paano na determine ang date ng election sa New Zealand?
So elections are called in New Zealand by the governing party at the time. So the prime minister sets out an election date.
So
Usually,
nagtatawag si Prime Minister. Sabi niya, election natin on this date. Ganon.
yeah.
Ganon
Like, I
kasimple.
want to have an election in September this year, but
Wow.
they have to give like a certain amount of notice. I think 3 months notice before the election.
Mm.
And then after the election is called, the parties enter what's called the regulated period. So that's the period where parties are like allowed to campaign and spend money to get votes during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that regulated campaign, there's the voting period, which I think this time you're allowed to start voting 2 weeks before the actual election day. So just go to your nearest polling station, which tends to be either your closest school or your closest church, and then just vote for who you feel like best represents your interests.
Okay. So walang indelible ink yan, Kiko, when you vote?
No, walang indelible ink. You just take a pen and then you
Check
tick.
lang na ganun, no? Simple. Walang media, walang whatever.
No,
Like sa
no
Philippines.
media. And on the actual election day itself, like because you're allowed to start voting before the last day of voting, which is called election day. You're not actually allowed to campaign on election day itself. So it's this weird phenomenon where where parties are like campaigning during a period where people are already voting, but not during the last day of voting itself.
And even may results, mabilis ang resulta sa election dito, Kiko, no?
Yeah, the results are usually known the night when the election happens.
Wow, very fast, no?
Yeah.
Sabagay, I mean, how many are we now? 5 million compared to 100 million sa Pilipinas. So mahirap din ikumpara, di ba? So
a lot less votes to count here for
yes.
sure. A lot less dead people voting as well.
Really? Even overseas voters can also be counted, tama ba?
Yeah, the overseas vote takes longer to get counted, so that result is not immediately known on election night because it takes time for some of the votes to trickle in from overseas. But 2 or 3 weeks after the election, like all of the votes are finalized and counted.
Okay. Now siguro I think most people who want to know, especially yung mga interested sa politics, paano ba mag-enter ng politics sa isang tao, even Filipino or anyone, kung gusto nilang pumasok sa politika? I mean, anong kailangan nilang gawin para makapasok sa politika?
Yeah, if you're interested in politics, you should get in touch with your party. So, like think about yourself and think about the values you stand for first, and then pick a party which best aligns with the values you stand for. So, if you care about nature a lot, join the Green Party. If you care about businesses, join the National Party. So it just really depends on the personal values you have as an individual. And then once you do that, you can either talk to your local MP if they're a member of that party, or you can just go to the party website or talk to your local candidate, and they'll encourage you to get involved with the party and start doing things for the party. And then one day, once you'll be able to run as an MP if you have support within that party and you've built up your networks in the party. So yeah, it's sort of like building a network when you're at a job. You
Mhm.
know, you've got to make sure you put in the time and you do the work if you're wanting to sort of climb the ranks of a particular party. And then once you do, like, I mean, hopefully the party will recognize the work you've been doing and help you by selecting you as a candidate for either local or national office.
So para ka pala lang nag-a-apply, naghahanap ng trabaho 'no, when you will try to enter politics dito sa New
Yeah,
Zealand.
in a way, it is sort of like
Ah,
looking for a job.
hindi
Yeah.
gaya sa Pilipinas basta sikat ka, puwede ka ng tumakbo, 'di ba? Pilipinas. So
Well,
even sa mga kabataan, Kiko 'no, I mean, I think yung ibang mga parties, especially yung mga bigger parties, meron silang avenue for the youth or yung mga young people to start early and sort of join politics 'no? Meron silang mga gano'ng avenue.
yeah, may
So
mga youth wing yung mga parties. Sa sa university, my branches. So
mhm,
if you're a young student and you're at a university, go to the O week or
mhm.
orientation week, and then just talk to the people at the stands and get involved in politics that way.
Okay. Now, I just want to get your opinions, Kiko. I mean, ngayon kasi meron tayong, of course, we have the first Filipino MP, si Paulo Garcia. And then ngayon meron tayong dalawang tumatakbo, si Romy Odanga and si Monina under the Labor Party. Um, what is your opinion or what do you think about Filipinos entering politics? Kiko.
Yeah, I think that Filipinos should definitely enter politics. It's a way of where we're nearly like I think 1% of the population here, and it's a way for us to get our voices heard, and it's a way for our concerns and our community concerns to get heard by the people in power. Because the Filipino MPs, not only do they bring their unique skill sets from whatever careers they've had, but they also bring their connections within the Filipino community and their perspective as Filipinos to the tables of the various parties.
Mhm.
And that's really important because if New Zealand is to represent all of our people, everyone, it needs to have our voices at the table. And a good way of getting involved with that is getting involved in politics because there's that old saying, right? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Mas mahirap ata na sa menu,
Yeah.
um, now, so I don't think we have any questions, Kiko. Well, that's the first. Mostly shout. I mean, I think I forgot to especially thank si Direct Rene. I mean, I think he introduced us to each other when I was looking for a speaker about politics and in New Zealand or political system. So again, I want to thank Direct Romy for connecting us, and then I got to invite you, and of course, maraming salamat sa pagpapaunlak, Kiko. And so before we end the show, Kiko, I mean, any last words on to our, especially to our kababayan, mga Filipinos on uh, on uh, on New Zealand politics, or probably can convince them to enter politics, or the future of Filipinos in politics? What do you think? Any on your last words about Filipinos in politics in general?
Yeah, I'll sort of start with your first point, in that I really encourage you to get registered to vote and make sure you exercise your vote this election because the politics in New Zealand makes a big difference to the lives we lead. It affects the health system we have, it affects the number of police we have, and perhaps more relevant to a lot of us who still have family in the Philippines, it affects the sort of immigration laws that we have. So if you believe in that the immigration system should be more generous and allow more relatives in, then you should vote for parties which reflect your values. If you believe that we should prioritize looking after nature, you should vote for parties that prioritize your values. So politics is an expression of the will that we have as people. And, you know, it's something that our ancestors fought and died for. And it's a right and a privilege that we should take seriously, especially in a country like New Zealand, where we have a political system like MMP, where the popular vote really does make a difference. And the second point in that, what do I see as the future of Filipinos in politics? I think a lot of parties are starting to recognize the value that Filipinos have. You know, we're friendly people, we're kind people, and we're intelligent people. And they're starting to notice and pay attention to our communities by doing visits, by ensuring that Filipinos are in winnable places at the list. So if you want to see more of that, and if you want to see the parties that we have reflecting your needs and your concerns, you should definitely get involved in politics, either through voting or by getting involved directly through getting involved as a political activist or joining your local union or whatever political group, you know, whatever pressure group that is advocating for the things you believe in, because your voice really counts in a democracy, but you have the power to make it really count.
Okay. So maraming salamat, Kiko. I think those are really powerful words, and I
Thank
think
you for inviting.
marami ring na-inspire sa mga words mo on people, especially yung on people who look high on politicians or who are interested in politics. So I'm glad na you've imparted your opinions, your thoughts on especially Filipinos who would like to consider politics.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's great to be here, Jin. And if anyone has any questions they want to ask me, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. And I think Jin has linked my LinkedIn page.
Okay. So yun lang po. I mean, I think nasabi na po na lahat ni Kiko. I mean, of course, he's the expert on politics. And again, maraming salamat, Kiko, for sa pagpayag sa gabing ito. I know we people, a lot of course, you would have to, you have your own time to on what things you want to spend to. But again, thank you for spending this particular hour. I know it's late. And just to, again, the objective of this program, this Zoom seminars, is really to educate and inform, especially Filipinos. Yun lang naman yung objective natin. And not to, again, it's not to promote a party, not to promote a candidate or politician, but basically to educate people, especially Filipinos. So yun lang po. Magandang gabi and good night.
Salamat.
Salamat, Kiko.
Bye-bye.